Stop relying on hoses and taps like they're permanent fixtures in your garden, because they're not. Water interruptions, rising costs, and inconsistent pressure quietly wreck more gardens than pests ever do. I've seen thriving beds stall out in a week just because someone missed 2 days of watering during a hot stretch. If your system depends on you remembering to turn something on, it's already fragile. There's a better way to build resilience directly into your garden, and it costs about $12. This infinite water idea isn't magic, it's just physics most gardeners ignore. What I'm about to show you isn't new. It's been used in dry coastal regions and off-grid systems for decades, but somehow it never made its way into everyday gardening. It's called atmospheric water harvesting, pulling moisture straight out of the air using temperature differences in surface area. No electricity, no pumps, no complicated tech. Just smart placement and the right materials. Here's the reality most gardeners overlook. Even in what feels like dry air, there's still water suspended as vapor. At night, when temperatures drop, that vapor condenses on cool surfaces. That's dew. You see it on grass every morning, but most people never think to collect it. The trick is increasing that surface area and guiding that condensation into a usable flow. The basic setup is simple, but small details make or break it. You're working with 3 main components: a condensation surface, a frame to hold it at the right angle, and a collection channel. I've built these using shade cloth, fine plastic mesh, or even old window screens. The sweet spot is a mesh with enough texture to encourage droplets to form, but not so tight that airflow is restricted. For a small backyard system, a 1 meter by 1 meter mesh panel is enough to start seeing results. Mount it on a simple PVC frame, half-inch pipe works fine, and angle it at about 30 to 45 degrees. Too vertical and water runs off too fast before droplets build. Too flat and airflow drops, which kills condensation. Below that mesh, you attach a basic gutter. I've used cut PVC pipe, aluminum channels, even repurposed plastic bottles sliced lengthwise. The key is giving the water a path into a container without losing it to splashing or evaporation. In terms of cost, you're looking at roughly $5 for mesh, $4 for PVC, and a few dollars for connectors and a basic gutter. That's your $12 system. Placement matters more than materials. I've tested this in open fields, tight backyard gardens, and even on a rooftop hydroponic setup. The biggest difference in output always comes down to placement. You want airflow and temperature fluctuation. That usually means slightly elevated positions, fence lines, above raised beds, or along the windward side of your garden. Avoid dense tree cover where air stagnates. You're not trying to hide this system, you're trying to expose it. If you're in a humid climate, you'll get more consistent yields. In drier areas, it still works, but you need to maximize overnight cooling. Positioning your collector where it radiates heat into the open sky, away from walls or heat-retaining surfaces, makes a noticeable difference. On a good night with moderate humidity, a 1 square meter panel can collect anywhere from 200 to 500 milliliters of water. That's not enough to flood a bed, but it's more than enough to maintain moisture in a small root zone or keep a hydroponic reservoir topped up. This is where gardeners get it wrong. They expect volume instead of consistency. If you're thinking this replaces your entire irrigation system overnight, it won't. That's not the point. The real value is consistency. A slow, steady input of water that doesn't depend on you being there. I've used these collectors to drip directly into raised beds by connecting the gutter to a small tube. When you pair that with mulch, thick mulch, not the decorative kind, you create a microsystem where water enters slowly and stays in the soil longer. In hydroponics, it's even more interesting. I've run a small nutrient reservoir where atmospheric water feeds in overnight, offsetting evaporation losses. You still manage nutrients manually, but you reduce how often you need to top up water. Over time, that adds stability to the system. Now, let's address the obvious concern: cleanliness. Dew and fog water are relatively pure, but as they run over your mesh and into your gutter, they can pick up dust and debris. You don't need anything fancy to fix that. A basic gravity filter works. I've used a simple setup with a cloth pre-filter followed by a layer of sand and charcoal in a container. Pour the collected water through that before storage if you're planning to use it beyond irrigation. For garden use alone, especially soil-based systems, you can skip filtration entirely. Plants don't care about a bit of dust. So, scaling this up really changes how your garden behaves. One panel is just a proof of concept, but, 3 to 5 panels start to make a real difference. When you line them along a fence or structure, you're not just collecting water anymore, you're actually creating a passive hydration system. I've set up 5 panels feeding into a single 20-liter container. Over a week of decent humidity, that container fills enough to handle supplemental watering for a medium-sized raised bed. Not entirely, but, enough to buffer against those missed watering days. And honestly, that's the real advantage. You're building redundancy into your garden. This pairs perfectly with systems that reduce water loss. If you're still watering bare soil in full sun, this won't save you. You have to combine it with water retention strategies that actually work. Deep mulch, at least 5 to 10 centimeters, cuts evaporation dramatically. Shade cloth during peak heat reduces stress. And if you're serious about efficiency, subsurface watering or alas can stretch every drop further. I've run a setup where atmospheric collectors feed into buried clay pots. The water seeps slowly into the surrounding soil, right where roots need it. That combination outperforms traditional top watering in both efficiency and plant health. Why this old method disappeared and why it shouldn't have. Modern gardening leaned hard into convenience, hoses, timers, drip systems. They work, but they also create dependency. When something breaks or stops, the whole system fails. This method doesn't replace those tools. It complements them. It gives you a baseline level of water input that keeps your garden alive even when everything else stops. The reason it faded out is simple. It's not flashy, and it doesn't produce massive output instantly. But for anyone growing food seriously, reliability matters more than peak performance. What to expect after you build your first one? The first few days, you'll probably check it every morning, expecting a full container. That's not how this works. You'll see small amounts, maybe a cup, maybe 2. It doesn't look impressive until you stop and think about it. That's water you didn't have to carry, water you didn't pay for, water that showed up on its own. After a couple of weeks, the pattern becomes clear. You'll start to notice which nights produce more, how positioning affects output, and how your garden responds to that steady input. And that's when it clicks. You're not just watering your garden anymore. You're harvesting water. This is one of those systems that rewards attention, not money. You don't need expensive materials or complicated designs to make this work better. You just need to observe and adjust. Try different mesh types. Adjust angles slightly. Move the frame a meter to the left or right and see what changes. These small tweaks can double your output over time. That's the part most people skip. They build it once and leave it. But if you treat it like any other part of your garden, something you refine and improve, it becomes far more effective. If you care about growing food long term, this kind of thinking matters. Water is always the limiting factor. Soil can be improved, pests can be managed, nutrients can be added, but without water, none of it matters. Systems like this shift your mindset. You stop thinking in terms of inputs you have to provide and start thinking about resources you can capture. That's where real resilience comes from. If you're serious about building a garden that actually produces through heat, through dry spells, through the times when things don't go as planned, this is the kind of system worth adding. Subscribe to Gardening Simplified if you want more practical methods like this, the kind that actually hold up in real growing conditions. And if you know someone still dragging a hose around every evening, share this with them. It might be the simplest upgrade they can make to grow better food with less effort.